So we're back.
Again.
End of the month, EDH takes.
Very, very late in the month for sure, like always.
Yeah, it's getting right into the station on empty. I'm Elijah Samuelson.
And I'm Spencer Cook.
And today we're back talking about Magic cards. We're talking about something I'm very passionate about, but in a different way than, say, with Boros. I think most people can kind of be in agreement in that they don't love playing against blue decks.
Yeah,
Right, Spencer?
I mean, there's always that frustration there with a lot of the things that blue does, so I think that's there's some truth to that for sure.
But I feel like in the recent years of EDH, people have begun to forget the dark times.
Back when blue was the menace. I guess, yeah, recently, I mean, there's a lot of talk about green, being the most powerful color in Commander, and while that is, certainly a fair point, especially in the lower to mid power levels of cards. Once you start getting up into like the, including all the cards from the last 25 years and like no budget restrictions, blue definitely has a lot going for it, right?
Yeah, and the color pie is an interesting mechanism of Magic that is prone to always have imbalance.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's hard to always keep every color equal, but I feel like most people could agree that oftentimes blue has been a little bit favored. If you especially link this way back to like Alpha and the Power 9, well, there's the Mox and there's Black Lotus, but there's also 3 other cards.
What color are those cards?
Yeah, what color are they?
But yeah, I mean, and obviously something that everyone likes to go back to is the what is it, the Boon Cycle? Is that what they're called?
Yeah, the cycle that Ancestral Recall is from.
And
the
obviously
cycle.
Ancestral Recall is by far the best. But I mean, like, it's not a great argument to go back and say, look at Alpha, blue was better in Alpha, therefore blue is better. Like, that's not like what we're going with here. It's just an example of like 25 years ago, blue was very clearly like had a lot of the best cards.
Yeah, and even like after Alpha, there was a while, I feel like, where they were still kind of coming to an understanding of what colors could and couldn't do.
Yep.
And when designing things, or the mechanics of the color pie, things like counter magic and card draw being put into blue, it's hard to maybe for them to have understood how powerful that was going to be.
Yeah, and especially like how powerful those cards would be in the future, because blue might not have been like super like crazy powerful back then, but like as the game evolved, the things that blue was doing, baked into its color pie, and just the types of like really powerful cards they have just kind of evolved to be like some of the most powerful things you can do, right?
Yeah, so the take of this episode is that I believe that the common consensus in most levels of Commander play has become that green is the strongest color now.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly green has received many benefits over the last few years and a lot more card draw. And there's this argument that goes this way in that, the things that are most important in Commander are thought to be ramp and card draw. Well, green can now draw cards almost as well as blue, but it ramps much better.
Yeah.
Therefore, green is stronger than blue.
And like that argument like seems to follow, but I think the thing that argument misses is that it's kind of discounting the other aspects of the colors that give them strengths, right? So like blue, I think we both agree that blue has a lot of strengths outside of card draw that it can kind of pull upon and like pull from to kind of cement itself as the best. And like you were saying earlier, I think blue also kind of like ramps just about as good as green. Right? Like it's worse than green, but like it does fine for itself, right?
Yeah, and especially with the use of artifacts, I don't think ramp is actually that important a thing to consider for a strength in Commander.
Yeah, what is it? Every color outside of green just like utilizes artifacts and does just fine, right?
And sure, green can, through the use of mana dorks or maybe very powerful ramp spells like exploration or burgeoning, stuff like that, can ramp very efficiently at a lower price point than a lot of colors outside of the use of fast mana artifacts.
Yeah, but I mean, like blue is probably the best color utilize mana rocks, right?
Yeah.
So I think we're gonna throughout this episode we're gonna make the case that blue is, at least in some aspects, better than green in some of the unique things that blue does that green can't do, and the other colors as well. So we do think that blue is probably the best color in Commander, and probably needs to be stopped.
Yeah, we think there's a lot more to consider than ramp and card draw when evaluating a strongest color for Commander.
Yep.
And so I think that blue has been and will likely continue to be the strongest color in Commander. And like Spencer said, it needs to be stopped.
All right. Well, so our first main section we're going to talk about is what are the powerful things that blue does, like, and why are they so powerful, and how they affect a game of Commander, right?
Yeah, every color in Magic, because of the color pie, has certain abilities and effects unique to that color, or at least mostly unique. They have a near monopoly on certain effects.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing, which I consider to be the strongest effect in all of Commander, would be the extra turn spell. So, what exactly is an extra turn spell, Spencer?
Well, an extra turn spell is a spell that lets you take an extra turn. So what that boils down to is...
Yeah, that doesn't seem so bad, right?
Yeah, it's fine, right?
Just take an extra turn after this
no
one. That's
big
a
deal.
short line of text.
But if you really sit down and think about what that means, that means you get an extra combat step, you get an extra draw step, you get an extra untap step, and you get extra upkeep step and an extra end step. So you get all of the phases in a turn, you get another of it. So at the very worst, an extra turn spell is at least card neutral and mana neutral, right? There's no downside because you're getting an extra turn, you're drawing that card again, and you're untapping all your lands and artifacts and stuff, right?
Yeah, let's see. So compare this to, say, an extra combat spell in red. Oftentimes, averaging 4 mana or so, get an extra combat after this one.
Mm-hmm.
Seems fine. For 1 more mana, there's 3 different effects in blue that give you a whole extra turn. And like Spencer said, they're pretty much always resource neutral because they pay for themselves. They give you that extra untap step that will net you back all the mana that you spent on it.
Yeah, and like I said as well, you get anything that triggers every turn that you have, like an upkeep trigger, like there's so much stuff that you can do.
Yeah, so I play a couple extra turn spells in more casual combat-based blue decks as a way to get an extra combat, because you can't really get that outside of red unless you use an extra turn spell.
And that's the most fair way to use an extra turn spell, right? Is just for an additional combat, right?
Yeah, and you go and do it like that, and you think, oh, that's fine, I'm just doing it for the extra turn spell, or for the extra combat. But it's like...
It's so much more.
It's like if I went to a restaurant and was like, I'll just get this, I'll get the cheeseburger, and then they brought out like a 4-course meal and dessert, and then they also paid me $50 to eat it. That's what an extra turn spell is compared to an extra combat spell.
I see. Well, I certainly would appreciate that if I went out and did that. But yeah, so like the thing with extra turn spells in blue is like they have like so many different kinds of extra turn spells that are like really big on efficiency. So like time warp and temporal manipulation, where they just like don't cost as very much mana, so you can easily like get that mana back. Like I think those are all 5 mana, right?
Yep, they're 5 mana, and notably they don't exile themselves from the graveyard after being cast.
Yeah, so you cast that, you have 7 mana, access 7 mana. You untap, you draw a card, you play a land, and you've netted like at least, what is that, 4 or 5 mana, something like that, plus everything else that you would have got out of it. And then besides the efficient ones, you also have ones that are like not as like low mana cost, but they give you multiple turns, like Expropriate or Time Stretch. They're just kind of crazy in that way. And like I was saying, they're not as efficient like right away, but they do give you 2 turns, so you end up like doubling the mana you get out of them.
Yeah, anytime somebody takes multiple extra turns, it's insane. It's oftentimes I think most people could manage to win the game with 2 extra turns.
It's true. And oftentimes, you come across that situation where it's not 2 extra turns, it's infinite extra turns, because they've assembled something like a Panharmonicon with an Archaeomancer, and it lets them get them back gets to back an extra turn spell plus a bounce spell from their graveyard so they get to just like win the game.
Yeah, especially with those ones that don't exile themselves.
Yeah, like Time Warp, right?
Being able to recur them with something like an Archaeomancer is just an insane resource advantage.
Yeah, and blue also has access to extra turn spells that are on creatures, which is just like another avenue of them having the extra turn spells, like Lighthouse Chronologist, I think, and Sage of Hours, right?
Yeah, Lighthouse Chronologist is the one you have to level up, and then at the end of your opponent's turns, you get an extra turn. Sage of Hours then would be the one that you can remove a certain amount of +1/+1 counters from it, and then take an extra turn. So if you're able to keep reloading those counters onto it every turn, you can just take infinite turns, like in an Azuri Claw of Progress deck.
Yeah, I've got personal experience playing with Wanderwine Prophets in Anala Wizards deck, because with the Anala's Eminence ability, Wanderwine Prophets ends up, it's a little bit complicated how it works, but it pretty much ends up being, if you can attack a player without being blocked, you get to take an extra turn, and then you can keep doing that every turn.
Yeah, among these, there's a newer one is Time Stream Navigator that I like to use every once in a while. And it's a pretty fair one for the most part. You need to have the City's Blessing, so you need to have 10 non-land permanents, and it's 4 mana, tap it, put it on the bottom of your deck, take an extra turn. So it doesn't seem like it should be that abusable, but in the deck I have it in, my Varina Tokens deck, I think there was a point when I was able to make like copies of it with Rite of Replication, or even one game I think I was able to somehow steal somebody's Helm of the Host and then put that on there, and then you just get infinite turns.
Yeah, and then I mean the thing with extra turn spells are there's really like no such thing as a bad extra turn spell in blue, honestly. Like I'm looking through the list of them all right now, and I can't find any of them that are like even remotely bad. All the ones that have downsides are other colors.
Yeah.
like what is it? The blue and red one, Stitch in Time, which only gets, it's a flip a coin, and if you flip it right, you get an extra turn. Like, or Seed Time in green, where you get an extra turn, but you can only play it, if someone casts a blue spell during your turn. All the ones with downsides are not blue. The blue ones are always unconditional.
The red ones are like Warrior's Oath, take an extra turn. You lose the game at the end of the extra turn, which those cards can still be extremely powerful.
But like not on the same level as the blue extra turn spells. Yeah, there's only one. I think there's only one blue extra turn spell that has a downside, and that's Wormfang Mantra, and that, or Manta, sorry, and that's a bit of a weird one where you get like skip a turn, then you get an extra turn or something.
Yeah, because what's the worst case scenario with a Time Warp? If I have 5 lands in play and I play Time Warp, all it does really is draw me a card and allow me to put an extra land into play. It's just an Explore. But
yeah.
It didn't really cost me anything.
It didn't cost you anything, yeah.
So free Explore.
0 mana Explore, plus maybe making more mana, right?
Right. Yeah, I think you'd probably play that card.
Yeah. And even like Walk the Aeons, which is, I mean, it's 6 mana, so it's a little bit more expensive, but it's got take an extra turn and buyback for sacrifice 3 islands. Like, if you're in the situation where you're going to be sacrificing 3 islands, like, I think you're going to be doing just fine taking, a couple extra free turns and winning the game, right?
Yeah, either you just take the 1 extra turn for 6, or you have enough lands that you can take 2 extra turns in a row.
And then probably win.
And yeah, that should be good enough to win.
Yeah. Well, so I think we've made a decent argument for extra turn spells being at least a little bit good, right? And like we were saying before, this is one of the things that blue kind of has sole access to doing it well. And there's really only Stranglehold as like a way to stop extra turns, right? Like, and Ugin's Nexus, right?
Stranglehold, Ugin's Nexus.
I don't know if there's anything else.
Aside from that, you have to counter an extra turn spell.
Yeah.
Which brings us into our next subject here is counter magic. It's a thing that mostly just blue can do.
Yeah, there are a few notable exceptions to that, but for the most part, blue has a monopoly on counterspells. And one of the things with counterspells is that, they are they're probably the most versatile card type in the game. The only thing they don't do is they don't let you be proactive, but they're able to be reactive in every way you could possibly want. So, like, for example, a counterspell allows you to stop your opponents from from progressing their board, doing a combo, anything like that. But counterspells also allow you to protect your own board. So whereas in a green deck you would need to, put in different cards to different things. So for example, like a Beast Within to stop your opponent's effects, or a Heroic Intervention to protect your own board. A counterspell fills double duty on that, doing both of them at the same time.
Yeah, like I've got that Verena tokens deck it's Esper, and I could play Teferi's Protection in that deck, and it would probably make sense, and maybe I will at some point if I can make some cuts, but I play counterspells in there as interaction, and they also function as board protection, so it just makes more sense for me to keep that in.
Mm-hmm. And also, like, the one thing with counterspells is that every color in Magic has kind of like strengths and weaknesses, I would say. With the exclusion of white, every color has like types of permanents that it can't like destroy or deal with. So like black has a hard time dealing with enchantments. Green has a hard time dealing with creatures, right? Blue has a hard time dealing with. It's supposed to have a hard time dealing with like permanents on the field. You can usually only bounce them. Except counterspells just deal with anything. So they really can answer any permanent type, given that they have to do it, on the stack.
Yeah,
but that's not a downside, right?
Yeah, and I wouldn't look at it this way as like, well, blue can't deal with these things, with certain things. No, blue can deal with anything, but it's also the only color that can really interact with the sorcery and instant card types.
Yeah, I mean, besides like taxing effects, which makes them harder to cast, the other colors don't really have any way to kind of react to an instant or sorcery on the stack, save for like a redirect in red or something. But other than that, there's nothing, right?
Yeah, like what's your hard quote like removal for an instant or sorcery? Like if I'm playing a mono black deck and somebody goes to play an extra turn spell, how do I stop that?
I don't think you have any repercussion really, outside of like before that playing a Ugin's Nexus or something dumb, right?
And like we said, there are some exceptions. Like a card I like in white is Lapse of Certainty. Just the ability to have that counter spell, and it counters a spell and puts it on top of the owner's library. So it's not gone for good, but it gives you the time you need. Like it is that answer to like if somebody plays Expropriate, you need to stop that from resolving, because if it does, they're going to be up so many resources when they do it.
Yeah, and technically some of the red change target spells will be able to stop an extra turn spell, because many of them do say target player takes an extra turn, so you can kind of get them with that. But the point here is that outside of some corner cases, these other colors don't really have the breadth of ability to deal with this like blue does.
Yeah, Tybalt's Trickery is another notable inclusion we just got in Kaldheim, which I think is a very strong card.
It's really great. Yeah, it's awesome. So again, this isn't like a statement that like we necessarily need all these things. It's just that like blue has access to these things in a way that makes it inherently more powerful than the other colors in these aspects.
And notably, there's a lot of blue counterspells that don't cost you any mana.
Yeah, that's true.
And gives you the ability to interact without having to hold up mana for interaction. And you can interact even on the first turn of the game before you even have a turn.
Yeah, that's one of the most backbreaking things, I think, with blue counterspells, is that mono blue or even blue and blue X, color decks are able to just like tap out and do whatever they want, but still have that kind of get out of jail free card they can hold back. And you just have to play around counterspells all the time. Like playing against a blue deck, you have to know they might have one of the 7 or 8 free counterspells in blue. Like that's a lot.
Yeah, and while a counterspell may not be able to be used in a proactive way, it allows you to play your deck in a much more proactive way, because you don't have to worry about holding back that mana to be reactive.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, it's not like you're playing like bad free counter spells that like you have to pay like a significant cost to play. You're playing cards that are like very well accepted to be like amazing. So cards like Force of Negation, Force of Will, Fierce Guardianship, especially, I think those are all like kind of higher power level format staples that don't really have much of a cost to playing them, especially in a color that already has as much card advantage as they need to kind of offset that that kind of force of will effect where you have to get rid of a card from your hand.
Yeah, and if you're playing at the higher end of Commander and playing those like more combo-based decks, they stop your opponents from interacting with you in a meaningful way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, everyone might like to think like, oh, we can all chip in our one piece of removal at them, but if they're at that point where they've drawn so many cards and they have like 2 or 3 free counterspells, it reduces a lot of the interaction that you can have.
That's one thing I kind of want to go off on for a second. So one of the things with blue decks is that, and this isn't unique to blue decks, but one thing that happens with most blue decks is they can kind of put themselves in a position of inevitability later into a game where they have enough mana and enough cards in their hand where there's realistically not much that you can do about them. They're just kind of assembled sort of a lock where they can handle your stuff, have 4 counter spells to stop anything that you try to do against them, or at least, yeah, I don't know. It's so like this is the kind of thing that might like other decks would have to assemble some sort of board combo to do this, whereas a blue deck just might need a couple cards in their hand to have it that way, which is a big difference, I think.
Yeah. And aside from free counterspells, there's many counterspells that, while not necessarily free to cast, will, upon casting, net you back so many resources that it's as though they were kind of free, or they will gain you resources, sort of in the way of the extra turn spell, such as like Mana Drain. I think is one of the big ones.
Mana Drain is absurd. It's a 2-mana counterspell that lets you make upwards of 5 or 6 mana on your next turn. And the Mana Drain is so powerful as a ritual that you'll see people just like cast Mana Drain on any inconsequential thing just to get like that big influx of mana. Or you can cast it on something that matters and get a slightly smaller influx of mana, but like still have it as a counterspell.
Yeah, even the quote fair Mana Drain, which is Spell Swindle, it gives you treasures instead of giving you
and it
just
costs 5 mana instead of 2?
Yeah, it costs 5. But it gives you treasures instead of that big burst of colorless mana. That's still a really good card. Yeah. I really like that card because it's strong, in my opinion. We've got also like the ones that will draw you back a card, like Arcane Denial, Mystic Confluence. They're just very versatile.
Yeah, Sublime Epiphany will give you some other advantage in other ways. So like it'll draw you a card and it'll also be able to make a copy of a creature or something. Just get that value. Yeah. Bounce a thing, maybe.
So those ones don't really like make you go down a card resource. Like they don't get you mana back necessarily.
Some of them even go up cards. Like for example, Mystic Confluence counter draw is like a divination plus a counter spell.
Yeah, and then we've got like just really efficient ones like Swan Song, Flusterstorm, being able to just hold back one mana.
It's so one thing that I express a lot when I talk about commander cards is that just being able to hold up 1 mana for your removal or your interaction is a world of difference between having to hold up 2 or more mana. It's actually crazy how much of a difference it matters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Forbid, while not being very mana efficient or even like card efficient, you can buy it back by discarding 2 cards. Just allows you to turn your spells into a counterspell pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
And just always having a counterspell is kind of hard to get out from sometimes.
Yeah, so counterspells are kind of good card types in Commander, I would say.
Very strong. Yeah, it's the amount of things you can do with a counterspell is just, I think it's hard to match with any other kind of removal.
Yeah, and like you mentioned a bit earlier, they've kind of been exploring adding, like for example, Tybalt's Trickery, that new red card that is a counterspell with like a weird downside. That card seems like just really amazing in a red deck, and it's many degrees of magnitude worse than just straight up counterspell, blue counterspell in blue. So what does that say about how good counterspells are?
The strength of counterspells.
When you make a counterspell that also gives them a spell from their deck to cast for free, it's still really powerful.
Yeah, because I think we've approached a place in Commander where there's a lot of win conditions that are just based around get to a certain amount of mana and play a big spell.
Yeah.
And like I said about not being able to interact with instants and sorceries, a lot of those win conditions, like that's the only way to deal with it. Like if somebody plays Torment of Hailfire for like X equals 20, what's your answer aside from a counterspell?
That's pretty much all you got, yeah.
I guess the solution is you can usually see that thing coming and you should stop it beforehand, but if you can't,
yeah,
it's a counterspell. It's got to
Mhm.
be.
Yeah. And yeah, like you said, like counterspells just allow you to be just to play super reactive. Like normally other decks would have to, do some sort of like targeting of that player that has 20 mana, right? But a deck with counterspells can just deal with the player with 20 manas by the way, deal with 20 mana by just countering their big spell or countering their card advantage spell, so they have nothing in their hand.
Right. It gives you the opportunity to wait a bit more.
Yep.
Wait and see.
So moving on from that, our next thing that we have to talk about, which is Blue also kind of has a monopoly on, is their ability to steal things from other players, where be it on the field, their deck, stuff like that.
Yeah. So like we were saying before, people would say blue doesn't have strong removal for a permanent once it hits the battlefield. It's got counters, but aside from that, it can just bounce
It
things.
just bounces, yeah. Well,
wouldn't you say that stealing something is usually just as good, if not better, than removing it?
well, yeah, because there's this concept of card advantage, where if you play a 1-for-1 removal on someone's thing, that's like you being like neutral with them. You're card neutral. You go down a card, they go down a card. But if you steal it, you're going down a card, they're going down a card, and then you're going up a card because you're getting that card. So it's really like just inherently card advantage and removal at the same time.
Yeah, if somebody played their Avacyn Angel of Hope, would I rather Swords to Plowshares it or play Gilded Drake and switch with them?
Yeah, imagine so just think of it like this. Imagine your Swords to Plowshares, instead of saying 1 mana kill a thing, it said 1 mana kill a thing, and then draw a card, which is a 7 mana creature, and then cast it for free.
Yeah.
That's what a steal, like a Gilded Drake is ending up being.
Yeah, Gilded Drake being, I think, the main offender at 2 mana. It's a 3/3 flyer. It ETBs and you switch it with somebody else's creature.
Yeah.
So probably, you see a lot of control magic effects, usually in the form of auras in blue, but I think that's the most pushed version of this effect.
Yeah, and another thing that stealing effects allow you to do is they oftentimes you just like take people's commanders and they have to they have to either kill it, which they might not have access to, or bounce it or something, because they don't have access to their commander, and that's like really powerful usually. Like I played a game just recently where I stole a Tatiova player's Tatiova, and they're like, I'm not sure if I have a card in my deck to to get that back. Luckily for them, it ended up dying at some point, but needless to say, like that was only a third of the effect, because it was a Blatant Thievery, which is quite a powerful steal effect.
Yeah, and you might say, well, guys, this all sounds like it's for creatures, right?
Yeah.
No, blue can just steal anything, and it's actually been a thing for a while. Like I was looking through specifically more the auras, and they are a bit weaker than the permanent effects that steal it, because with an aura that steals something like a control magic, they could destroy the aura, they get their thing back.
Yep.
But there were things like Take Possession is one I really like. It's the 7 mana split second one.
Yeah.
Gains control of a permanent.
Mm-hmm.
Or like Volition Reigns. You've got Steel Artifact, Steel Enchantment. Those are like either 2 or 3 mana for those ones.
I think what Agent of Treachery is one of the big ones that came out recently. That steals anything, right?
Yeah, that's a recent one that I think is along the lines of the strongest, like steal any permanent effect, because it's an enter the battlefield effect, and you just gain control of it permanently.
Yeah, and even the worst stealing effect cards, like for example, you were mentioning the auras aren't great. Probably some of the, I mean, they're not saying they're bad, but like cards like like Lay Claim or like Embolus's Clutches are probably the least efficient stealing effects, right? They're still usually pretty powerful, right?
Yeah.
On their own. Like, the cool thing is being able to, like, Embolus's Clutches like a Planeswalker and then ult it or something. Like, that's the dream, right?
Yeah, and even though they don't seem very efficient, it's still, Commander being the format of big spells and big creatures. If somebody's spending 7 or 8 mana on their creature, and you're able to gain control of it for 5 or 6 mana,
yeah,
like tops, that's really good.
Mm-hmm, for sure. And then I guess just to kind of hammer home the point, blue really does have like the ability to take anything, and even efficiently, because one of my favorite cards is Thieving Skydiver. Pretty new card, but it's really versatile, but like the best mode of it is 3 mana, 2/1 flyer. I believe it's 2/1.
Yeah.
Take a Soul Ring. That's usually the mode. But you also have the modes of pay a couple more mana, take a sword, equip it, right? Or take a Greaves for 4 mana or something. So like Thieving Skydiver is probably one of the best seal effects they printed in the last couple years.
Yeah,
besides Agent Treachery.
And I can see the argument for if everything gets bounced, people still get their stuff back.
Mm-hmm.
But you still got the gain from being able to use their resources for however long you did. That I think it's a trade-off for the certainty of exiling like a combo piece or something.
Yeah. And then Bribery lets you take a card from their deck, right?
Yeah, Bribery gets any creature from their deck for 5 mana, so you get whatever their biggest creature. And just the cheating of mana costs on a lot of these things, I think, is the
powerful part.
The powerful part, yeah.
Yeah, so even in decks where your deck is built like not the most powerful. So for let me just go back for a second. So for example, I built a Kaza Royal Shaper, I think it's called, deck. That I built it with an intention to play with a couple mid to high power level decks and a guy who's playing a precon. And I put a bunch of fun cards in there and a couple creature and permanent stealing effects, and those just scale really well when your opponent's doing strong things, even if your deck's kind of weak.
Yeah, they do kind of scale with the game, but you're still always getting that resource advantage.
Yeah.
From having to pay less than the opponent paid for it,
mm-hmm.
which I think is always going to be very strong. So speaking of that resource imbalance in the CMC of what your opponents pay and what you pay, blue is also the color of clones and copying things.
Yeah, and it's not technically stealing things, but it is kind of getting the best thing on the board for usually less mana than it costs.
It's kind of like the saying, anything you can do, I can do better.
Mm-hmm. And well, just speaking recently, like it's not something that's like just like old blue did it and they don't do it anymore. Even recently, you have cards like Orvar, who just came out, who is super, I would say, like a really egregious example of just degeneracy in blue, honestly. Like Orvar is one of the most degenerate decks because they just, well, any number of cards just combo win with it, first of all.
Mm-hmm.
Ignoring that, you can just play any number of spells for value and copy anything that you have.
Yeah, at least Orvar is just your own stuff, right?
Yeah, it is. But like it can even you copy your lands. One of the best things I think I've seen people do is there's that new artifact that when it enters the battlefield it draws
Coveted Jewel.
Coveted Jewel. It draws 3 cards and taps for 3 mana, and it's got a downside where your opponents get it. But that never happens if you just play it and then make 9 copies of it and draw your deck and then keep going.
Yeah, if you make like 10 of them right away because it ups you all those resources
and gives you the 3 mana back,
it's fine.
Yeah. Someone played that in a Brago deck as well recently against me. I'm like, oh yeah, that seems good. But yeah, besides Orvar, just sorry, that was a little bit of a tangent. Talking about the topic more directly, just like the sheer number of clones that you can make in blue to get the best thing on the table that anyone has.
Yeah, there's any number of strictly better clones now, and I think personally the most egregious is Phantasmal Image.
Because it's 2 mana.
It's 2 mana. It does have that illusion clause of if somebody targets it with, it has to be a spell, right?
Yeah.
It gets sacrificed.
A spell. Might be I don't remember, but yeah, sure.
But that still causes them to spend a card on it. But still, being able to get the best creature on board for 2 mana.
Yeah, I always like to. The thing with clones is even if they like get removed, I always like to think of clones as usually in a game of Commander there's a decent ETB effect in play from a creature. So you clone like the Sun Titan test, where how would it look if I cloned a Sun Titan right now? Would that how good would that be? And then it got immediately killed. It would be pretty good, right?
Yeah, still worth 2 mana.
Yeah,
for sure.
Or you get like even something like not very good, like a creature that draws 2 cards or something. Like you're still getting that value from it.
Yeah, that's a good way to evaluate Phantasmal Image. Honestly, it's just like, is this ETB worth 2 mana? Is it worth it if it's also a giant body?
Is it worth it if it also has a static effect that stays around, for like if I get like a I don't know, just anything. You can get mana dorks that are like big mana dorks, or anything, I guess.
The next most efficient clone would be Phyrexian Metamorph, I think.
Yeah, and that one's pretty great because usually Phyrexian Metamorph in the developing stage of the game is 3 mana. I have a Soul Ring 2, or I have a Thran Dynamo 2, and in the later game it's I need this E-Witness right now to get back a board wipe, or I need this really big value creature right now. It's the most versatile card in like most decks, honestly.
Yeah, being able to copy an artifact or a creature is really nice.
Yeah.
We have recently in Throne of Eldraine, Mirror Maid copies an artifact or enchantment, and then you also have the individual like copy artifact, copy enchantment. But then you can copy anything too, aside from lands. Clever Impersonator comes in as a non-land permanent for 4 mana.
That one was really expensive when it came out, and then they reprinted it in a commander deck, I think, and now it's just like it's really accessible to everybody. So that's awesome. Well, awesome in that everyone can get it, not awesome in that it's a little bit powerful, right?
Yeah, it could be a planeswalker.
And that's another thing. Now that you mentioned that, another thing that Blue is able to do with their clones is they have several cards that allow you to ignore the Legends rule with your clones. So one of my favorites, Spark Double, allows you to Spark Double? Yeah.
Yep.
Allows you to copy a creature. This one's just ones you control, but a creature or planeswalker, and it's not legendary, and it also gets 2 counters on it, or 1 counter, I think.
Enters with an additional +1/+1 counter if it's a creature, counter. Or a loyalty counter if it's a planeswalker.
But the main thing from that is just being able to kind of get another copy of your commander usually, and then it ends up, usually if you have 2 Tatyovas, it's a lot better than having 1 Tatyova, right?
Right. You also have the new partner Sakashima from Commander Legends that does that,
and the old Sakashima as well.
Old Sakashima can be anybody's thing, which is really nice, and you can also bounce it back to your hand with an activated ability to recast it.
Yeah, so you can, and then the thing with those is once you use one of those on someone's thing, it now no longer is a legend or or ignores the legend rule or whatever the one you do, and then you can copy that with your other clones to get even more of them. So if you play what's the kicker one? That's like the Rite of Replication is one of the best clone spells actually.
We almost didn't mention that.
I almost forgot about that card. It wasn't even in our notes because I just had not remembered. But Rite of Replication is when you Rite of Replication a Sakashima that isn't a legendary creature, you just get to have 6 of them now.
Yeah, there goes another big spell that you would need a counterspell for.
Yeah, how many times have you played a game where someone Rite of Replication's a Dockside Extortionist, or even something not something simple like a Blood Artist or something? Someone Rite of Replication's a Blood Artist, a 2-mana creature, and then all of a sudden you kind of lose because a bunch of Blood Artists on the board in response to and then a board wipe will just kill the table, right?
I think the last time I played a Rite of Replication, one of our friends had the 6-mana green creature with Lieutenant that gives your creatures +2/+2 and trample.
Yeah.
If you have your commander out, and I had my commander, and I was just like, a couple creatures. I had some tokens too, and I'm like, I'll kick a Rite of Replication on that and give all my creatures +10/+10
and kill the table, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and even something simple like Rite of Replication on Eternal Witness is usually really powerful because you get your Rite of Replication back and 4 other cards from your graveyard. So
yeah.
Rite of Replication is probably my favorite. I said it was Spark Double, but Rite of Replication is my favorite clone spell for sure.
Pretty good.
I think that's about all we have to say about clones. They're very good. I especially recommend Rite of Replication. That's a great one. But kind of on that theme of kind of cheating mana costs, like we were mentioning, Blue also has a lot of access to cheating mana costs by either generating a bunch of mana, having quote-unquote free spells, not talking about counterspells anymore, but cards like Omniscience, which allow you to cast all of your spells for the rest of the game for free, from your hand.
Yeah, Blue has the my spells are free mechanic. It's great.
And I guess I don't have a good retort to respond to that one.
Well, at least they have the decency to make it somewhat rare lately.
Yeah, they Omniscience is really the big one, right? Like you said.
Yeah, Omniscience is the big one, but I always like to think, and these are mostly older cards, but the spells that they have their mana cost, but as a part of their effect, they untap a certain amount of lands equal to their converted mana cost.
Yeah.
And I just like I don't understand. They're just free at that point. By the time you have mana to play them, they're like the extra turn spell.
Mhm.
They net you back the resources that you spent to cast them.
And they're really abusable is the thing. So everyone, I'm sure you've all heard of the in like a Riku deck or something, which allows you to make copies of your creatures when you cast them or when they enter the battlefield, I think. And like the iconic Riku and Great Whale, or any of Palancron, Peregrine Drake type stuff, where you just tap all your lands, play your big boy, make a copy of it, untap your lands, and then you get to just keep making copies of it and make infinite mana. Or Dead Navigator with that as well.
Yeah, the part of the blue color pie that involves untapping your lands. So we were discussing this last night and trying to figure out like what thematically is happening there, and I guess it's kind of like the extra turn spells where it's like you're abusing like time magic and
Yep.
like you're going back in time and like you're reusing this resource that you used previously and now you get more of it.
Yeah, like for extra turn spells, it's like the time magic where like, oh, I I go back to a point. I guess for these I'm sorry, for these it's like I guess I cast my creature and then I use time magic or something to go back to a point before I tap my lands or something. I don't know. It's a little bit weird. I don't quite understand the lore behind these like Cloud of Fairies or Frantic Search or whatever, right?
Yeah, time magic OP.
I guess. Time magic is probably the best superpower in any if you want to try to make a superpower, right? I don't know how you can beat that.
Yeah, like,
well, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say things like even the ones that don't like give you a full like untap on their like for lands like Teferi Temporal Archmage just untaps 4 permanents, but like you can do that. It says any permanent, so it can be like mana rocks and stuff too.
So in like a we're not necessarily talking about CEDH, but one of the big CEDH decks is Chain Veil Teferi, and the way that deck works is you play a couple of mana rocks and then you play Teferi on turn 2 or 3 and untap all the mana rocks. It pays for Teferi itself and more.
Yeah.
And then you're able to just win the game. But yeah, I think they made Sphinx of the Second Sun recently, which also gives you an additional untap step, which
it gives you a beginning phase at the end of your second main phase.
So it automatically pays for itself if it lives to your second main phase.
Yeah, and then it will also draw you a card, so it kind of does an impression of an extra turn spell. It doesn't give you the ability to cast spells after that, but if you're playing blue, you're likely playing at instant speed a lot.
Yeah. Then you have all of those cards like that untap all of your non-land permanents, like Dramatic Reversal, and that Intellectual Offering card, I think.
Yeah, that one's
not
much less popular, but just the existence of Dramatic Reversal too, with that, like we were saying, like with Chain Veil Teferi and stuff like that, like the abuse of artifacts in blue.
Yeah, and that's kind of weird that's part of blue's color pie. It feels like blue kind of gets to everything. Like I thought, like you'd think that untapping, creatures in particular is like a green thing, or maybe even a little bit of a white thing. But blue just gets to untap every permanent that's not they untap their lands or their non-lands, whatever you want, right?
Yeah. It's a weird, like, it's not just time magic almost, it's like reality manipulation.
Yeah, and what is it? Turnabout lets you, is one of the big combo ones, lets you untap all your lands or tap an opponent's lands, or does it let you untap your artifacts?
Yeah, it's like choose one, tap or untap.
Lands, artifacts.
Artifacts, creatures, or lands.
So,
player controls.
So you also get to untap your creatures with that if you need to, I guess. But, yeah. Do you want to talk about the other ways that blue has to make mana besides like untapping their lands and untapping, stuff like that? Because they have other ways too, by the way.
Well, yeah, like we were saying, blue, like every color has access to artifacts and equal access to using fast mana and very efficient mana rocks. But arguably, blue is the best color at abusing them because it can tutor for them the best and it has the ability to untap them very easily.
Yeah. So cards like Trinket Mage is kind of an auto-include in most blue decks because it lets you just get Soul Ring on a body. Cards like Fabricate and War of Invention and Reshape and Transmute Artifact allow you to tutor any artifact into play or into your hand or into play, depending on the card.
Yeah, because what are the arguably the strongest cards in Commander? Mana Crypt and Soul Ring, right?
Yeah. I think most people would agree with that.
So the ability to have those in most of your games, I think, even if it's not on turn 1, like some people would make the argument, oh, Soul Ring after turn 3, it's really not that great. I think it is. It's mana positive the turn you play it. Like my Thada Adel deck doesn't have a lot of ramp in it, but it has the ability to play my commander on turn 3, hit somebody turn 4, and just have a Soul Ring like consistently from turn 4 onwards. And that's really strong.
That leads you into just making a ton of mana for the rest of the game, for sure. And Blue also has really good synergy with artifacts besides just getting them into your hand or into play. So like Copy Artifact allows you to, make a copy of an artifact, obviously. Power Artifact allows you to go infinite with cards like Basalt Monolith. So, I don't know. Outside of artifacts even, you have cards like High Tide, which allow you to just fit into that category of making 1,000,000 mana and comboing off. I mean, that's more akin to you play High Tide, tap a bunch of mana, you untap your lands and make more. But
yeah, High Tide Turnabout.
Yeah,
it's quite strong.
I just forgot to mention that earlier, so I wanted to throw it in there.
High Tide with all those cards that untap your lands, it just leads you into like High Tide Palinchron.
Yeah,
infinite mana.
Yeah. Because Palinchron for some reason lets you bounce it to your hand.
Yeah, that's great, isn't it?
I don't know why, but
it's amazing.
Yeah. So overall, I think those are these last 30 minutes have been us talking about some of the really powerful things that Blue has access to, most of which other colors don't have access to, or at least have very limited access to.
Yeah, I just think these effects are the things that make Blue strong, and that aside from just the card draw, because we didn't even mention, Blue is by far, bar none, the best color at drawing cards.
They have some of the best card draw spells in the game. A lot of them are unconditional. They don't require any, like a lot of green card draw spells require you to have creatures into play or to cast things later, whereas blue cards are just a lot of either cheap spells like Rhystic Study that accrue cards over the game, or single effect card draw spells that draw as much cards as you have mana.
Yeah, because like we were saying, with the huge amount of mana you're able to produce in a blue deck will pair very well with the things like Blue Sun Zenith or any of the other X spell.
The other 6 or 7 blue X draw card spells. So what do we do about this? I think is the next place we go here. Some people will try to like a sentiment you could get from this conversation that you could think is that we're trying to say that like, oh, blue decks are just really easy to play and they're just have like better they're or like I don't know. I just don't want people to think that we are like demeaning blue players or whatever, because I get it. Like you play whatever colors you identify with, or if you really like certain cards, you play those cards. So, you're not like, I don't think you're like doing anything wrong by playing a blue deck. I just think that that as like a community or whatever, when you're playing in a game with a blue player, you might just have to change how you prioritize targeting. So like you might have to realize that, okay, this blue player is a little bit more of a threat than I might have originally thought, is kind of where I'm going with this.
Yeah, I think you mentioned it earlier, how blue especially it's not a hard, or it's kind of a hard thing to threat assess a blue deck, because they don't oftentimes keep a lot of resources on board. It's the card draw color. You keep a lot of your resources in your hand, and blue decks will make a big board with like artifacts and like utility creatures and stuff, but I think you need to keep amount of cards in hand as a metric for your threat assessment.
Well, think about this: when a player plays a Rhystic Study, it should set off alarm bells in your mind. You're like, oh my god, if this Rhystic Study stays around, we're going to lose the game. Why do you think that is? It's because with Rhystic Study comes Counterspells, or other similarly powerful things that you just don't have enough resources or mana to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
And when the blue player has 20 cards in their hand, there's not much you personally, or sometimes even as a table, can do. So doing things like attacking a blue player's ability to play how they want to play is really helpful. So, for example, a blue player at 20 life is a lot less scary than a blue player at 40 life, because it means they can't, just like save all their interaction for the best possible time. They might have to use a counterspell on something like a Inferno Titan or something, versus saving it to protect their game-winning play.
Yeah, and I would give some advice to blue players in general. I've known and seen a few blue players playing mono blue or blue and X decks that maybe weren't playing the correct amount of card draw spells in their deck, just because the ones that you might be playing, like Consecrated Sphinx and Rhystic Study, do it so well that it feels like you don't need that. Like, I think we usually go around like 10 plus like card advantage effects.
Sure. But I think what you're trying to say is that, like, if, like, realistically, if you have a Rhystic Study in your hand, in your opening hand, and no one removes it, it's the only card draw spell you need, right?
Right.
But, like, I think ideally players should be assessing those cards as huge threats and removing them promptly. So you probably might need to play more removal spells in your blue decks, because you're going to justifiably be targeted when you play those card advantage spells, right?
Yeah, nobody should let Consecrated Sphinx stay in play.
No, kill it at the earliest possibility, for sure.
Yeah, it's just crazy.
Yeah. One thing that I just want to mention real quick, that we forgot to mention earlier. I mean, we didn't really forget. It just wasn't super important. But blue, when we were talking about the removal that blue has, blue also just has some of the best removal in the game for creatures, which is kind of weird,
blue
right?
actually does have really strong creature removal, which is strange.
So the best cards being Rapid Hybridization, Pognify, what's the 2-mana? Reality Shift. Curse the Swine. And actually, there was a new card that just got spoiled the same day we were doing this. See if I can find it real quick. Where is it? Let's see. Resculpt. This is a 2-mana instant in blue that says exile target artifact or creature its controller creates a 4/4 blue and red elemental creature token. So there was a lot of hype when Ravenform came out about it being really like this crazy powerful card, right? And I think you and I, Eli, weren't super big on Ravenform, mostly because it's a sorcery, right?
Yeah, people were very hyped because it's a blue card that exiles an artifact as well as a creature. Or you could choose an artifact or creature, but usually blue wouldn't have like hard remove an artifact.
Yeah, but the thing is, the other blue removal spells that they had printed earlier were just so much better, right? Like Pognify and Reality Shift were just like, they're cheaper mana, they're instants. But this new card, Resculpt, kind of gives those a run for their money, right?
Yeah, it goes on the list.
I think Resculpt might even be stronger than Reality Shift. That might be a little bit of a hot take, but it's at least around the same level, right?
I could see that, yeah, because Reality Shift sometimes will give somebody, it'll manifest a creature that they
matters.
Can flip up.
Yeah, and this also has that extra versatility to hit artifacts. But
yeah, which is big.
Yeah, I'm sorry for going on that tangent. I just remembered that new card got spoiled today, and I kind of wanted to talk about it, but
yeah, so blue does have this way of destroying or exiling creatures a lot of the time.
Yeah,
and it's presented in the mechanics, or like the flavor of the game is like, oh, they're polymorphing this thing, they're changing it into something else.
But that something else usually is much worse than the original
but
thing.
But a token is pretty much always worse than the card that you're getting rid of.
Yeah, always. Almost always.
Especially, with blue being able to bounce things so well as another form of removal.
Yeah, so one thing that to tie this in a little bit, how we were talking about threat assessment, you might think that it's the case that, like, okay, the blue deck, it deals with things through counterspells and bounce spells. Bounce spells, which usually cost, like mass bounce spells, usually cost, 5 to 7 mana, right? So this blue player has only 1 or 2 mana up. That means it's a safe opportunity for me to go and pressure their life total. I can maybe deal, 10 or 12 damage with the creatures that I got into play before they played their counterspell. Well, you would think that, but they also just have access to these some of the most efficient removal spells in the game. I would put Rapid Hybridization and Pognify as probably close to like the second or third best single target removal in the game after like Swords to Plowshares, right?
Yeah.
I don't think that's super controversial. I think they're just that powerful.
Gosh, it sucks. Black is supposed to be the best color at destroying creatures, but what's the commander playable 1-mana black instant speed kill spell?
I mean, the best thing you have is like Tragic Slip or like Fatal Push, or what's the other
Vendetta.
one? Vendetta.
That's non-black creature.
Yeah, I would at least. I mean, I would like to see a. I would personally really love to see a universal 1-mana, like maybe just a commander playable card. It'd probably be hard to not make it broken in Legacy, but like 1-mana kill a creature and then some downside for yourself because it's like a black card. But that would be really. I think that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
I love playing black personally, so but might be a little, maybe not every color should have 1-mana really efficient removal, but whatever. I digress. So Eli, what do you think besides this this idea of targeting blue players? What else should we do to stop blue?
Well, I think Wizards has started to realize that card draw is such an important mechanic that it can't specifically just be within certain colors. Like, I think white is getting more card draw, but that I've never felt was super important. But I would like to see more counterspells in other colors. Maybe not like green and black. I don't know, but white I always felt like would be a really good color to have some form of counterspells, a la like Mana Tithe, like Mana Leak type effects.
Yeah, and I kind of don't literally hate Mana Tithe. I think that card is actually probably decently playable in Commander, like just because holding up, I'm a sucker for an interaction that costs 1 mana or sometimes 2 mana, and the ability to just like sometimes get people is pretty awesome. So I like that kind of design of very very specific counter spells. I don't really personally like the they've done a couple white counter spells. They're like counter a spell that targets something you control. I think those are a bit too specific for my liking.
Yeah, those spells like Rebuff the Wicked may as well just be give a permanent protection from a color. It may as well be a Faith Shield.
Probably be better off having it be that, honestly.
Yeah.
But yeah, besides counter spells, I think
people could afford to run a little bit more color hate specifically for blue. I don't think somebody's ever necessarily incorrect for playing like Pyroblast or Red Elemental Blast in a deck.
Yeah, I think most higher power level, like mid to upper mid power level decks that are like red will probably at least consider playing the Red Elemental Blast and Pyroblasts. In addition to those, something I kind of like doing is I like having like playing sort of looting effects or just having an abundance of card draw so I can play some other color hate cards, not specifically those ones. So like, it's a little mean, but what is it? Choke? Is that what it's called? Where islands on tap?
Yeah, islands on tap.
It's a bit fun. It's a little mean, but you gotta do it. I mean, it'll just get countered anyway, so it's fine. No, but I mean, if you play like something I like to do is, like I said, play like hate cards and loot them away. I guess I already mentioned that, but yeah, you understand what I mean.
With increasing your card draw and your card advantage in a deck, you can afford to play a few more cards like that, I think, so that your dead cards don't hurt so much to draw.
Yeah, so there's a couple blue hate cards that you could maybe consider running. Maybe not Choke, but especially the blasts and Pyroblast and Elemental Blast, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Another thing to fight back against the blue menace: say no to no. Protect your turn. I've always been a big fan of the card Grand Abolisher. I'm a big white player, so that's. I got a foil of that in a pack when I was a kid, and I've kept it ever since.
Yeah, those are just abilities that stop them from interacting your turn. Isn't there an artifact that does that too? If it's equipped to something? Or equipment, sorry?
Yep, Conqueror's
Foil, yeah.
You got stuff like Defense Grid that makes spells cost 3 more to cast if they're cast on a turn other than their controller's turn.
Yep. I think there's a red enchantment which makes it so if you tap your lands on an opponent's turn that destroys them or something.
Yeah, Price of Glory.
That's probably one that you probably could use that I don't think the blue player wants to. Well, I guess they can still cast their free counter spells, but
yeah,
it stops them from casting their they're not free color counterspells and stuff. So that's nice.
We've had silence for a long time, being able to like run that out before playing your big spells, so your opponents can't interact. Recently, we got Ranger Captain of Eos, which I think is kind of a better version of silence.
Oh yeah, and you mentioned silence, but they just spoiled a new card just yesterday. We do the notes for this, and they we ask for a new silence, and they answer us. They just printed Flame Scroll Celebrant, which is a rare from not Kaldheim, Strixhaven. That it's a creature with some kind of like deal 1 damage when your opponents like activate abilities that aren't mana abilities to them. But the relevant side is that, well, that's relevant, but the relevant side of this discussion is that the other half is white for pretty much a silence. Your opponents can't cast spells or activate Planeswalker loyalty abilities this turn. So it's the problem I have with silence a lot of the time is that it's not very flexible, right? You just kind of when you don't need to do a silence, it doesn't do anything. Whereas this card, if you don't need a silence, it's a creature that actually does things.
Yeah, so seeing more effects like that in white, I think is really cool.
That was really cool to see, yeah.
An old Gruul favorite of a lot of people is Vexing Shusher.
Yes.
It's this goblin that you can pay a red and make it so a spell can't be countered this turn.
Mm-hmm.
And it can't be countered, so that's a good way to get through blue decks.
Yeah, and I guess a couple more just to add in. You could play like Beseju, who shelters all, which is a way to like stop a spell, an instant or sorcery from being countered, I believe. And then what is it?
Cavern of
Souls. That one's pricey, but that does a good job of stopping your creatures from being countered. So you do have options if you really want to get something off.
Mm-hmm. So just making sure to play more cards like that to make sure your threats resolve.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's a big level up moment in becoming a better Magic player when you're able to like play around counter Magic. You're like, oh, this person has 2 blue up and they didn't play anything on their turn. Like they're probably presenting a counter spell. But in Commander, you can't even become that good at that with all these free counter spells now.
Yeah,
it's just so hard to tell.
Mm-hmm.
You can't play around things that easily.
It always one of the better feelings you can have playing against a blue deck is when you bait a counter spell and then you play the thing that you actually didn't want to get countered and it doesn't get countered. That's usually a really like rewarding moment. You feel like you had like agency in the game and you like kind of won up to the blue player. It feels good.
And we do have a weapon in the fight against the free counter spell menace now.
Yeah.
In Deflecting Swat.
It's true. The free counter spell.
Yeah, we've got our own now.
But yeah, I mean that's kind of where we're at for blue being a color that needs to be stopped. Do you want to kind of like a recap, maybe put a little bow on it? What would you say, Eli, is the best? What's if you could put this into 1 or 2 sentences, what would you say your thesis is here?
Yeah, so blue has been and will likely, because of these effects we've listed in this episode, blue will be the strongest color in Commander for a long time. And unless something swings wildly out of balance and they're trying to quote fix white, I don't think there's even a world where they could make white so powerful that it.
No, I don't see it happening.
Yeah, I think people understand that these effects are strong, but maybe people don't understand just how strong they are, like extra turn spells and free interaction.
Yep. And it's up to us players to deal with it appropriately, to build our decks in ways that have ways to counteract these powerful things that blue does. So we need to add in the very small number of ways we do have to interact with an extra turn spell or whatever. Not saying play Stranglehold, but like Tybalt's Trickery is a really good example of a new card that you can probably put in most red decks if you need to deal with someone playing a powerful blue deck at your table. Or in addition to that, you also change how your threat assessment is. If your opponent, if the decision comes to you on turn 3 and you play a Rex Sage and you have to kill a Soul Ring from a blue player or a mono white player, I think you're going to be better off in that game killing the Soul Ring from the blue player.
Yeah, and just remember stuff like the blue deck can often be as scary as the green deck with no board presence.
Yeah. That's
the Azami deck that plays Mind Over Matter and has a grip of 20 cards with a Reliquary Tower or something out, like, is as likely to win that game as the green player with a 10/10.
yeah, and 9 mana dorks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just keep that in mind that, blue, it does have the ability to really explode and oftentimes win in a combo win.
Yeah. Well.
So just be on the lookout for that.
Yeah, and just kind of think again about how you threat assess. That's probably the biggest takeaway I have personally.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I think that's about all we have, right?
Yeah. So thanks again for listening, and make sure and try and give us a follow on Twitter at EDHTakes, and give us a subscribe, like, dislike, comment. I don't
really care.
Some kind of interaction.
Yeah.
It's always appreciated.
It's mostly just to make us feel good, right? To help our egos so we know that we're not...
Yeah, I love getting the comments and seeing people are listening and liking it, and I like interacting with people and meeting new people. It's always great.
And feel free to set us straight if you think we're wrong about something. Like I like not screaming into the void. So, I like to know that people are listening, and if you have a different opinion, I would love to hear it. I think we're pretty open to new perspectives.
Yeah,
right?
This is supposed to be a discourse podcast, and mostly I hate the idea that we're fighting against straw men sometimes, or that Spencer and I just agree too much.
Yeah.
So we'll come up with something where we disagree eventually. We'll get a debate going.
Yeah, but that's all we got, I think. So this has been Spencer Cook and
I'm Elijah Samuelson. We'll see you next time.
Yep, peace.